Let's start off with Juan Guaido and what the heck happened there. So he's no longer, the US government is no longer recognizing him as the president of Venezuela, right? They were saying, oh, this is the legitimate president, even though there is a president of Venezuela. They were trying to insert Juan Guaido in. Whatever happened, let's start with just what happened to him. Where is he now? Do they have a new person that they're trying to insert in, or are they giving up and they're saying, well, maybe we'll just recognize Maduro after all?
They certainly have not officially rescinded their recognition of Guaido to the point that they've restored any official relationship or recognition of President Nicolas Maduro, who throughout this entire time, since 2019, when the US initiated this corporate coup, what I call a corporate coup in my book, Maduro maintained control of the government throughout the past 4 years. Not one single agency, ministry, or small section of the Venezuelan border fell under control of forces loyal to Guaido, who was at that point an unknown opposition lawmaker in his early 30s, who had risen the ranks of US-backed NGOs in Venezuela and ultimately US-backed party, the Voluntad Popular Party, which maintains a very small, or now is not even in the National Assembly, but used to maintain a small presence in the National Assembly. No one knew who he was. A poll conducted at the time found that 80% of Venezuelans had never heard of him before. But in January 2019, the US recognized him as president of Venezuela, essentially declaring their coup mission accomplished before it had actually taken place, and implemented a series of sanctions and other destabilization policies that they believed would lead to the collapse of the Maduro government. It didn't happen, and all of these years later, essentially what happened is, for one thing, there were national elections in 2020 in December, which for the national legislature, which Guaido and his party boycotted. And all US backed opposition parties in Venezuela boycotted this vote because their strategy has been, since they can't actually win at the ballot box, to just refuse to participate in elections, because then it gives the image that Maduro and the left-wing socialist parties are running a dictatorship in Venezuela, and there's no bipartisan or multi-partisan opposition or options at the ballot box. Now, this doesn't always work because there are fiercely anti-Maduro, fiercely anti-Chavista and socialist parties that still participate in the election because they're not backed by the United States. The US has actually threatened to sanction those candidates and has sanctioned opposition candidates just for participating in their elections. But because Guaido and his party didn't participate, Guaido lost his seat in the National Assembly, which meant he was no longer in the National Assembly. He could no longer claim to be president of the National Assembly, which was what he based his claim to the actual presidency on. And so he has no technical position in Venezuela, and ultimately members of his own US-backed opposition bloc moved to drop him as the president of Venezuela. And so as he fell out of favor with not only the normal, regular opposition in Venezuela, but then the US-backed opposition in Venezuela, he had no future. And, there are calls to arrest him. People view him as a treasonous all across Venezuela. So it's no surprise that earlier this year, he fled to Miami. And that's where he's living now. I've heard rumors that he enrolled in university classes there, but he really has no job that I can see. I would love to know how he's making money, but he certainly is not president of Venezuela.
Wow, interesting. So he's just hanging out in Miami. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great place. I don't blame him. It's that part of Florida is really nice. It's one of my favorite places in the US. Okay, so he's now living in Miami after this failed attempt. So what's interesting about what you've just said, and kind of back us up and talk us and kind of walk us through this, but the whole idea, the reason why the US, what they fed to us, the public, was that the reason why we're wanting to oust Maduro is because he's a dictator and they don't have free and fair elections in Venezuela. This is like always the narrative that they feed us, which is we're just spreading democracy. We have to oust these bad guys. Maduro's a bad guy. He's not letting the Venezuelan people actually have democracy. And even though the U.S. fails to say, and by the way, we're debilitating their economy, we're sanctioning them to death, they instead say, and look at their crap economy. I mean, people can't live there in this horrible economy because, I mean, look, they can't even afford medicines or food. And meanwhile, they omit the fact, but we're the ones doing that to them, not their government, but it's us, the United States, right? So they say but they sell to the American public. This is about democracy. This guy doesn't allow free and fair elections. And so we're just going in to help them. Aren't we so great? But you're saying that the US actually, there were legitimate opposition, because there's always in every country, people are going to love the government. And there's, of course, people that are going to hate the government, no matter who's in charge, right? So there's people in Venezuela who obviously don't like Maduro, the current president of Venezuela, and they want somebody else. And you're saying that the US didn't even, like, those groups and those people that were trying to run in a democratic election, that the US actually halted them, the very process they claim that's why we're doing what we're doing in Venezuela is for democracy, but they were harming democracy.
Yes, they tried to halt their participation and this has been essentially since 2014, the US-backed opposition. There are two opposition blocs in Venezuela. There are national Venezuelan nationalist opposition leaders that, as you say, like in any country, are opposed to their government. Venezuela, people might be surprised to know, is a democracy where there are far more parties elected in the national legislature than there are, dozens more parties than there are in our own Congress. So, and in the last election, which I covered in 2020, there were more opposition parties participating than there were parties that were party to the pro-Maduro or Chavista bloc. But since 2014, the U.S.-backed opposition, and when I say U.S.-backed, I mean these are figures and parties that, since Chavez came to power, led a democratic revolution in Venezuela at the turn of the century, which I give all of that history in my book. The U.S. has backed NGOs and passionately pro-Washington political figures, like oligarchic figures, including the heir to the family fortune of the individual who brought Kraft Foods to Venezuela in the 1950s. Or a lot of these people are ultimately individuals who trace their family lineage back to the European Spanish colonialists in Venezuela. So the U.S. picked out a few of these figures to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, ultimately millions, in backing their NGOs and their political parties to try and detract from Chavismo all throughout these years. And while they failed after 14 years to win a significant presence in the national legislature, ever win a national election, they just unleashed this boycott to say, oh, because Maduro is a dictator and because we don't have a legitimate democratic process, we will just not participate in the elections. And so their idea, and especially when it comes to presidential races, was to make it seem like there was only one party or only the Socialist Coalition allowed on the ballot. But of course, there are opposition candidates who are not part of this U.S. opposition bloc who had seats in the National Assembly or were governors in states or running local municipalities all across Venezuela. Why would they, back in 2020, for example, boycott an election that they were going to win? Why would they just give up their seat? And I have sources in that wing of the opposition who would say these things to me. Why would we give up our right to participate in our country's elections just because the United States and this crazy extremist opposition bloc wants us to? And so what happened in 2018 when one of these more nationalist opposition figures, Henri Falcon, he was a governor from the Lara state, he actually ran for president against Maduro. And this made the US so outraged because they wanted it to look like Maduro was the only candidate allowed on the ballot. And the fact that this other opposition figure ran made them so upset that they actually threatened to sanction him. I don't know, they never followed through, but those reports did come out in US media that they threatened him with sanctions. And then in 2020, during the national legislature election, they did the same thing. And this time they actually sanctioned opposition candidates who participated in that election. And Mike Pompeo, who is Secretary of State then, released some insane statement where he criticized them for damaging Venezuelan democracy. So he was actually saying that by participating in the vote and giving more Venezuelans a choice at the ballot box, they were hurting democracy. That is the warped mentality of US officials. And ultimately, they sicked mainstream corporate media outlets such as Reuters against people that were running for office and actually accused them of working on behalf of Maduro and the Socialist Party. They smeared people who hate Maduro, who are running against his party and trying to claim their stake in the National Assembly, as agents of the Maduro government. That in Reuters, I mean, that is the level of attack that Washington has waged against Venezuela's democracy. So tells you how concerned they are really about issues of electoral freedom.
Many ask me how I deal with reading the news every day and how I don't let all the crap stress me out and keep me awake at night. But the truth is, it does. But now I've discovered a hack, and that is BioOptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough. Magnesium is known to relax the nervous central system and cause chemical reactions in the body that de-stress and promote a good night's sleep. But you don't want to take just any magnesium supplement. Unlike other magnesium supplements that might be giving you like 1 or 2 forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind and help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Over 75% of the population is magnesium deficient. And what most people don't know is that even if they're taking a magnesium supplement, they're still deficient because they're not getting all 7 forms. So in addition to experiencing relaxed sleep, Magnesium Breakthrough also helps improve digestion, supports muscle recovery, and supports healthy bone density. So go to magbreakthrough.com/Iverson for 10% off. Trust me, your body and brain are going to thank you. Again, visit magbreakthrough.com/Iverson and use promo code Iverson during checkout to save 10%.